All right, looks like we are live. Hello, everyone. Um, Welcome to another webcast session for the Tech Entrepreneurship Nano Degree. My name is Mark. I'll be doing introductions, and the other person you'll see behind the presentation is Michael. He'll be the person today that will lead you through our 10 slide presentation. So it should be presentation should take no more than 10 to 15 minutes. I'm just going to allow everyone who is coming in late to just start coming in. Make sure that they are all situated. And please remember to, if you have any questions and answers, we will give you a Slido link for you to be able to ask your questions there. We will not be monitoring any of the YouTube chat stuff that you will see. Okay, Michael, are you almost ready?
I'm ready.
There's a prompt that says Google Drive is now full screen, so you should probably hit the button allow.
Sounds good.
Because everyone's seeing that. All right, great. I will mute myself and go for it, Michael.
Awesome. So today we'll be kind of covering key performance indicators. Definitely it's an important subject across any entrepreneurial venture. Specifically, you guys have to focus on it in the monetization project, but it's something that can be applicable at the early stage of a product all the way to a fully fleshed out product that you just want to try new features for, right? So as promised, we have a Slido link that you can use. Here it is. I'll leave it up there for a few moments. So essentially you can go and log on to the Slido link and post any questions that you have throughout the live webcast, and we'll get to them as you post them and as time permits. But feel free to post anytime. You don't have to wait until the end. Anytime something comes to your mind, go ahead and share your question. So like I said, I'll give maybe 15 more seconds just to allow you guys to all get in there. All right, cool. So, of course, since we're focusing on key performance indicators, commonly reduced to just the letters KPI, we, of course, need to kind of know what they are, right? So throughout this whole slideshow, I'll be working with the same example, and we're kind of going to go through an entire process of building out what a KPI is just with a single thought at the very beginning. So here, imagine I'm at the very, very early stages of Twitter, and I'm the one managing the product. I look through my data and my numbers, and I notice that 60% of all those using Twitter actually just create the account but never return. And so that's not really good for my product, right? I need to try and address that. So I want to use a KPI to keep me on track of the goal that I have of increasing customer retention in 10% within 3 months. I mean, the one thing that oftentimes gets kind of difficult with developing a KPI that we'll see later is how do you pick these numbers? How do you pick 10%? How do you pick 3 months? In all honesty, the KPI is something that's just going to help you, like I said here, stay on track or keep an actionable agenda to keep your eyes on as time progresses. So then let's just look at the definition of a KPI briefly here. So in essence, the KPI is a measurement that can help the entrepreneur, a product manager, any person in the business sector of a company to define and measure progress towards a common business goal. And so the thing that is powerful about a KPI is that it allows for a complex objective or a complex thought process or making a product and pushing it out into the marketplace is a very complex and difficult task. And so when you can have KPIs, it allows you to simplify the tasks and the goals that you have into condensed metrics that you can keep an eye on, keep track of, and then actually have actions put towards them as you work through developing or launching a product. So like we said, for this kind of example, we're going to say, I want to increase my customer retention by 10% within 3 months. So let's kind of break it down into the core components that I mentioned in the previous slide, right? So first of all, we have our general kind of complex objective, complex scenario, our area of focus, which is going to be your customers. Of the things that we could possibly measure from our customers, whether it be how active they are, how easy it is for us to bring in new customers, we're going to just focus on retention, which in our case is going to be the number of customers who use an account after they've created it. And our goal, our kind of actual numbers that we're going to be keeping track of, is we want it to obviously increase. We want our retention to improve by 10% within 3 months. But let's think that we're at the very beginning of the process and we're just kind of brainstorming what KPIs could I come up with to address some business situations or business problems that I'm having with my product. And so it all starts with picking just one area of interest. So if I say I want to look at just my customers or my users, I could think of them in several different ways. I can say, oh, I want to focus on retention, or I want to focus on revenue, or I want to focus on how much I have to pay to acquire a new user. So these are common things that you have to think about all throughout time as the product lives and adapts into the marketplace. Of course, there's other areas of interest you could pick. You could pick something such as marketing, which would have more of a focus on perhaps keeping track of how many leads or how many new visitors you have to a website, how you convert people from seeing an ad to actually clicking on something to divert them to your website or your product. So like I said, KPIs can be used throughout the entire both product development and just the product life as it is in the marketplace. They're very powerful, very useful things. So then let's say that we either focus on anything of those kind of user acquisition, retention, revenue. We need it to boil down to measurements, right? We need to say, what numbers can I come up with? Of course, in the end game, it's all about really how much money you're bringing in, how much your costs are. But there's many different numbers you can actually think of. You could think of, okay, when I'm looking at my measurements, am I asking myself, how do I make money? So if I'm thinking about the user acquisition, if that's my area of interest, how do I make money? Well, obviously, I need the users that I bring in to actually perform the actions that I have as part of my monetization model. But that's going to cost me money. So how does that impact my bottom line? Or I could see revenue in terms of my number of users. Or I can see my terms of revenue as how well I retain my users. And then finally, you really have to think about who are my users that I have currently, other types, other categories. We'll kind of get into that a little bit later in these slides, but just having a broad scope of something in a KPI doesn't help you. You want to have a very refined and focused definition of each and every component that you want. So when you just say to yourself, oh, I want to increase the number of users because I feel like that will increase my revenue or something like that. Well, certainly you're going to have several different types of users. Are you looking for users that are going to use your product for free? Are you looking at increasing the number of users that have a specific behavior? It's those types of refinements and definitions that you can use to help kind of narrow down your metrics and really get an excellent window into what's happening inside of your company itself. So then let's say I found my area of interest. I found what I want to measure, how I'm going to measure it. Now I have to form a goal. So let's say I want to increase my revenue from my active users. Again, that's still pretty broad. So I need to ask myself, who is my active user? I could say, back to our kind of global Twitter example, I'm in the early stages of Twitter. I can say to myself, an active user is somebody that visits either my website or my mobile app once a day. I could say an active user is somebody who does one tweet per week. Or I could say an active user is anyone who is going to be retweeting or sharing content with others in any sort of scale or number, right? So I know a lot of the times it gets problematic and sticky when you get to the point of kind of refining these more abstract definitions. We can get stuck. We can get a little bit concerned about making the right decision here, right? Do I say I want to make my active user to be the one who visits my app once a day, or do I want it to be the person who makes a tweet, once a week? Honestly, there's no wrong answer and there's no right answer. It's all about having the ability to narrow it down, measure it, and then act upon it, right? So if you were to make a choice, say, oh, I'm going to see my active users as visiting my app once a day, you're going to build a plan around that. And that plan is going to be something that once you get the numbers on, you can say, oh, well, I was successful or I wasn't. And one thing you can come back to try and revise your plan is say, what if I change my definition of active users? So that's kind of the mindset that I would hope we all would develop when forming a KPI, is that, yes, forming an abstract definition it feels a lot safer because it feels like we're covering all of our bases. But in the end, it's going to help us a lot more by actually taking the abstract definition, making it narrower, making a decision, measuring upon that decision, and then seeing the results. Because without doing that, any efforts we do will be inconclusive. And so finally, we have our area of interest, we have a metric, but let's now really actually have that focused goal. Because if we don't have a goal, how will we ever measure success, right? So in this example, I just kind of arbitrarily said, I want it to increase by 10%. I'll be doing my measurements for 3 months. I'm going to do these numbers just to make it focused. Is it realistic to say increase by 10%? Who knows? That's something that I want to shoot for. I want to aim for. I want to see how close I can get to that, just so I have like I said, a benchmark for success. If I keep it open and just say increase, I want it to go up, well, I mean, you could go up by one person. Is that a measure of success for your idea? Clearly, hopefully not. So at the end, when we look at putting together all of those things, we're going to form our actionable key performance indicator. And that's going to be, I am gaining 100 new active users that I'm defining as those who make one tweet a week, each week for 3 months, right? So kind of hidden behind that statement is our goal of increasing by 10%. So, just for example, saying getting 100 new active users is pushing me towards that 10% goal. For an actual situation, you'd have to actually pull out the data and crunch those numbers to get that how many new active users you need each week to reach your goal. But the important thing is, yes, we have how long we want to do our measurements, but we also want to have a better refined focus on how we're going to get to that point each step away of the way. So in this case, we're looking at weekly benchmarks of success of gaining active users so that we can keep track of it throughout those 3 months and actually just kind of have it as a jogging our memory of sorts, right? So at the end of each week, I can say, oh, I only got 50 active users. Can I adapt my plan to reposition myself to get 100 the next week. And so kind of just try to wrap things all together. A KPI is focused on one area of interest. You want to pick one area, just again, because you want it to have a conclusion. You want it to be definitive once you, along the way, are tracking things, but at the end, you can say, yes, this succeeded. No, it didn't. How am I going to measure that success? Well, I want it to be quantifiable. I want to attach numbers to it. I want it to be measured objectively. Not to say that KPIs can't have a subjective influence to them. Perhaps your product is more or less how customer satisfaction is doing, right? That's definitely a more subjective topic. But it's important to find at least some quantifiable numerical component that you can use, just so that you have concrete numbers that you can just look at objectively at the end of the day. And finally, a KPI should be specific in terms of time and amount, both long-term and short-term, as far as how you are keeping track of your measurements, how they influence your final goal, and how much are you going to be breaking apart your time to actually evaluate each of those things. So that is it for the presentation. Mark, are there any kind of questions on Slido that have been posted yet?
Actually, not a lot of questions have been posted, so it means that you were pretty clear on what a KPI is. So I'm not seeing any questions that's being posted right now live. So I'm just gonna go ahead and ask you a question, Michael.
Sounds good.
That will help initiate the conversations. So with the KPI, like, can you like can you tell me more a little bit about like measurement, like metrics wise? Because sometimes I know it depends on my ability of my business itself, but then do you have any tips for me to think about how can I define a good metric or some sort of number that could like help keep track of?
Definitely. So the measurement is one of the more kind of action-oriented steps, right? Because you're actually making a record of something. So what I would advise is, one, when you involve the actual direct numbers as part of either your goal, what you're aiming for, you want to make sure that they're realistic, right? So if I'm a company that only has resources to actually acquire 500 people within the next 3 months based upon my kind of projected cost for acquiring a new user, I don't want to set myself up and say, I want to get 50,000 new users in 3 months. So one, they need to be realistic. Two, you want to ask yourself, how can I actually record these types of things? So in the monetization course, we definitely introduce Google Analytics. That's one great way to set up your either web app or mobile app to keep track of whether it's a new user, whether it be where they are getting stuck with the process of your application or product. And overall, it's just a central hub of collecting and quantifying the information. So Google Analytics is just one option, but I would strongly suggest that when you're thinking of which metrics you want to use, sit back and ask yourself, is it something realistically capable of being measured? I mean, a really, not the best example, but to say, oh, I want to measure my customers' feelings with the app. Well, you have to sit back and say, okay, if feelings are going to be my metric, am I actually putting forth to them some sort of like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel? If I'm not doing something like that, how am I actually going to be getting those results? Am I going to actually have to sit in front of the customers? That's not realistic, right? So I would say both realistic in terms of your resources and realistic in terms of the technology and the ability to record are two things that would help find that metric that would be right for you.
Okay, Michael, so we have a question. Were they into metrics now? The question is, are there standard growth metrics for certain types of businesses that one can use as a guide when setting KPIs? For example, e-commerce business would mean to measure X, Y, Z.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thinking along the lines of that example of e-commerce, I could come up with several things that would be very important for me to keep track of as far as my metrics. For example, maybe through setting up something like Google Analytics, I find out that 90% of my customers reach the checkout page, but then only actually of those 90% of my visitors that get to the checkout page, only 40% make the purchase. I would have to sit back with that metric or those just raw numbers and say, how can I think of coming up with a number that is going to help me understand where those users are falling off? I mean, if it's just a single web page, right, and you have a significant portion of people not completing the final action you want them to, I could easily say, oh, well, I mean, one really easy thing is just the click-through rate. I want to boost up the metric of the click-through rate of that purchase button. Maybe I'll set up kind of experiments to, maybe my kind of overall goal is like, oh, I have the belief that making my purchase button green is going to bump it up by X amount. Another e-commerce thing that would be pretty popular, apart from the navigation flow throughout the whole business, or the whole website rather, I would say the ease at which people can input information, right? So another metric I might look into is either if I force them to sign up or log in, how fast can they do that? How can I refine that? How can I make that as short as possible so that it's not a roadblock? Or if I allow them to sign up as a guest and not have any recorded information, how can I make the process of either making the purchase, setting up payment, to setting up which address I need to send it to, how can I make that as refined, focused, and easy as possible? So certainly there are kind of common themes and trends with whatever product model you're looking at, whether it be a mobile app, an e-commerce website, etc. The actual things that you would want to measure, like I said, are pretty common, but in the process of how they should improve or how they need to be, number-wise, I think that's really dependent on the product itself, how the users are reacting to it. No, I wouldn't say that it's like an across-the-board thing that within the first year of an e-commerce website, you should have this exact KPI. It's certainly not like that. I would follow more along the lines of following either, like I said in the presentation, what's making your revenue, what's making your money, follow that money, and see what things you can record along the way that will help increase that bottom line.
Great, thank you for the answer, Michael. And this, what you just said about following the money, just actually leads into another person's question about vanity KPIs. Like, what is the best strategy to ensure that we don't end up just using any, vanity KPIs?
Right. So in general, the vanity metrics are just those that are, I wouldn't say meaningless, but don't help you fulfill that final goal, or they don't really measure a point of success for your business. So for example, if you were to look at social networking sites, right? So Facebook clearly has a really great number of how many users they have, right? It's in the billions. But if, per se, Facebook didn't have a monetization model where having a number of users was beneficial to them, then why would it bother? Maybe when it comes down to it, it's only a couple million of those real users that are creating the revenue. So if I was just focused on bumping up my number of people signed up for my Facebook platform, that would become a vanity metric because I'm not refining it enough, right? It comes back to that refinement. You want to say to yourself, is my area of interest too broad? Is it too abstract? Is it not to the point where I can actually say at the end, yes, this worked for my bottom line, or no, it didn't? If it's just something to throw out as kind of like like, oh, look, people actually want it. I mean, you could say technically second to Facebook, Google Plus has the second most number of signed in users, but hardly, it just doesn't come to our mind to say, oh, I'm going to communicate with my friends or post a photo or, say, hey, I'm having a party, and I'm going to do that on Google Plus, right? So even though they have those millions of users, it's clearly not something that is in the public eye to use their product for that. So in that case, the vanity metric would be for Google basically saying, oh, we have the second most popular social network. That's a vanity metric because in the end, they have to look and say, is that really what's bringing in our revenue, is the number of users that we have? So hopefully, I mean, Mark, if you had anything else to add to that. I know it's difficult because you can get caught up in just kind of the glory of how big a number is, or the glory of how, successful, like, oh, I want to push something to 100% success. I mean, that's a good mindset to have, but before you even start to worry about those numbers, make sure it's something worth recording, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I'll just take 20 seconds to just reiterate. At the end of the day, you are in business to make money. What are the things that you need to keep track of in order to make money, and how can you convert all of your free trials, all of the free stuff, all of the signups into making money? That's the end of the day. As me, as an investor, if I was to trying to invest in your business, or if I was if you were to try to recruit me as a co-founder, that's my main question. How are you going to make money? Where is this going? So that's where I'll end that up. And we have room for one more question. We have one last question here. Michael? Morelli R has a question. When do you start to define KPIs for your product? This is actually a good question. Is it after the completion of the product or some during the design?
Right. No, that's an excellent question. I see the development of a product as kind of, constructing a building, right? So at the first steps, we need to have a foundation. We need to actually have some place to build. So in my eyes, that foundation is doing our customer research, validating the idea, making sure it is a solution to a problem that is on the mind of my customers. From there, I would then, if I'm making a building, I would kind of set up the scaffolding. I would set up kind of the skeletal framework of it. And I would see that as kind of analogous of my prototyping and design, right? And so during that phase, I'm paying more attention to, does it make sense for me to make this into a triangle or make this into several squares or something like that? Constantly going back to my customers to make sure, does this part of my design easy to use? Certainly at that point of things, you can start thinking about a KPI, because going back to say that e-commerce example of converting people who are at the almost final stage of making that purchase, but if it's really confusing or difficult for them to find how in the world do I actually click yes, I'm buying this, that falls back into your design, right? And if you were to say to yourself, oh, okay, maybe it's kind of a watered down KPI, right? But say to yourself, during my 5 to 10 user interviews that I'm going to do with my really simple prototype, how about I record how how long it takes for them to find that buy button, how long it takes for them to actually take that action. And then I can say to myself, okay, I have my raw numbers now. How can I iterate on my design to bump that down by so many percent in blank number of iterations, or however you want to quantify the time scale, something like that. And so you can start thinking about your performance of your product or your building right when you're doing the scaffolding, right? Because you don't want to set yourself up such that you make a pyramid, but really what's going to help you and help you make money through your customers would have been building a square. So as far as the earliest point, I wouldn't say that there is ever a bad time to think about performance, making measurements. In all honesty, even at the point of customer validation, forming that foundation, yes, it's a little bit harder to actually get concrete numbers down, but you still are taking some form of a measurement, and you're still trying to get a sense of the landscape of what you're doing. So hopefully that answers your question. As you go from the scaffolding phase to actually putting in things like piping and electricity and floors, all of those things would be kind of like fleshing out the features of your product, going from an MVP to version 2 and 3, and each step along the way having really focused objectives of what you're going to be looking into as you progress through the product's launch.
Great. Thank you for the answer, Michael. We have one more quick question. I'll go ahead and answer this really quickly, and then we will end our session. Then the question is there any specific success rate for any product by using a certain KPI that has reached success, or it depends on the individual product? It really depends on the individual product and the scenario. That's the answer, because and there is no hard number. See, business, making a product, designing things, there's a lot of gray areas that say, well, it depends. It depends on your context. It depends on your situation. It depends on what type of business you're in. So there's no one concrete success rate. You yourself need to sit down, define your goal, and figure out, okay, for me to reach my goal in 3 months, what do I need to do every day to reach that goal? So let's imagine I want to reach a goal of 1,000 users in 3 months, 1,000 paying users. Let's just make it very concrete. Well, the road to get 1,000 paying users in 3 months is, let's just break it down. Well, how do I measure my performance? I want to measure how many paying users do I have every day. And let's say in 3 months, all right, I have 90 days, 90s. So 1,000 divided by 90, that's a pretty good success rate. If I get, 1,000 over 90, yeah, about 11 new paying users per day, that rate on average, that's a success. Because by the end of 3 months, I know that I will reach 1,000 users. So as you can see, I need to give you the context. I need to give you the metrics. I need to give you all those things in order to be able to help give you a success, what a success criteria would be. So that's the sort of critical thinking that we as entrepreneurs, we as business people, we as product managers need to really think about and just like pick apart. So it's all lies into, okay, what's our goal, what's our vision, and how do we work backwards, and how do we measure that? All right, I think that is it. Michael, do you have any last minute anything last minute to say to summarize this conversation? Great questions, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for both attending and asking questions. Certainly, I can understand and relate that taking these more abstract things and just starting from scratch of trying to come up with something like a KPI can be pretty daunting. So whether, throughout the program, you can certainly lean on the coaches, lean on fellow people in the forums, and then, later in life, it's really key that you have kind of those mentors, those more experienced than you, to help you when you kind of hit that blank page, I don't know what to do moment. So overall, just keep learning, keep getting experiences, and that's really what's going to lead to success. So again, thanks for attending, everyone, and we look forward to hearing from you in one-on-ones, forums, etc., and the next webcast.